Gabriel's eyes widened, his lips parting in shock. He stared at Jonathan as though seeing him for the first time. "Your son?" Jonathan nodded, swallowing hard. "David. He's gone now. But you knew him." Silence fell, heavy and profound. In that quiet, the walls between them dissolved. It wasn't coincidence anymore. It wasn't just resemblance. The threads of two broken lives had already crossed once before in that hospital waiting room, and somehow, against all odds, they had found each other again. Jonathan closed the notebook gently, sliding it back to Gabriel with a reverence that bordered on holy. "Your stories aren't silly, Gabriel," he whispered. "They're bridges, and I think they're going to carry you farther than you can imagine." The boy's eyes shone, torn between disbelief and hope. For the first time since they had met, Gabriel smiled, small, tentative, but real. And in that fragile smile, Jonathan felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, the spark of healing. Outside, the December wind howled across the street, scattering leaves like forgotten memories. Inside, two lives, once fractured by grief and loss, had begun to stitch themselves together again. One word, one story, one paper crane at a time. The city had a way of feeding on whispers, turning them into storms. 3 nights after the lunch that changed everything, Jonathan sat in his study, Gabriel's notebook resting on the desk beside him, when the phone began to buzz with relentless urgency. He ignored the first few calls. Then the texts arrived, dozens in quick succession. "Is this true? Have you seen it yet? Check social media right now." Jonathan sighed, slid the notebook aside, and opened his laptop. What greeted him made his stomach lurch. There she was, Victoria, perched on a velvet bar stool at one of the city's most exclusive clubs, martini glass in hand, surrounded by her friends. Her hair perfect, her laugh shrill, her words venom. Someone had recorded her without her knowing, the phone angled just enough to catch her face as she spat each syllable into the smoky air. "These beggars," she sneered, rolling her eyes with dramatic flair. "They're worthless, always with their tragic little stories. They'll steal your wallet the second you turn your back. And Jonathan? God, he's fallen for it, being manipulated by some street kid. It's pathetic." The laughter of her companions echoed around her. The camera zoomed in close enough to capture the gleam in her eye, the smirk curling her lips. Jonathan's chest went cold. He clicked another link. The video had already been clipped, subtitled, spread across every platform imaginable. Within hours, hashtags exploded. #elite racism, #beggarboy, #Victoria exposed. Millions of views, thousands of comments. Outrage flowed like a tidal wave, and for once, Jonathan wasn't standing in its path. He was watching it sweep away someone who had carved cruelty into every word she spoke. His phone rang again. This time, he answered. "Jonathan," a voice snapped. "Marcus, Victoria's boss. She's finished here. Do you understand? Finished. Clients are pulling out. The board is panicking. I can't keep her on. She'll be fired by morning." Jonathan said nothing. His silence was answer enough. An hour later, another call. Amanda, one of Victoria's closest friends. Her voice trembled with fury. "Do you realize what she's done to us? The whole circle is being dragged down with her. We can't be seen with her now. Tell her not to come back." Jonathan closed his eyes, leaning back in his chair. For years, Victoria had cared about image more than truth, appearances more than compassion. And now, image had turned against her, the same mask she had polished cracking under the weight of her own words. But as the world devoured her downfall, Jonathan's mind wasn't on revenge. It was on Gabriel. He found the boy in the living room, curled under a blanket, notebook in hand, pen scratching quietly across the page. The TV flickered in the background, muted but displaying the same video, Victoria's face frozen mid-sneer. Gabriel looked up, his expression uncertain. "It's everywhere, sir. People keep talking about me, about you, about her." Jonathan crossed the room and sat beside him. "It's not you they're talking about. It's her, her words, her choices. None of this is your fault." Gabriel's brow furrowed. "But they're saying I'm the reason she said those things, that I'm the one who ruined her life." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. No, Gabriel, she ruined her own life. You didn't put those words in her mouth. She chose them, and the world chose to listen. Gabriel lowered his gaze to his notebook. I don't like seeing people hate each other. Jonathan's heart ached. Neither do I, he admitted. But sometimes the truth has to hurt before it heals. The boy was quiet for a long moment. Then, with a voice so soft it was almost a whisper, he said, She doesn't see people like me as human. She never did. Jonathan felt something inside him break. It was the same realization he had come to, sitting in that restaurant when Victoria gave him her ultimatum. But hearing it from Gabriel's lips made it unbearable. He squeezed the boy's shoulder gently. I see you, he said firmly. I see exactly who you are. And one day, the whole world will too. Outside, the city buzzed with gossip, phones lighting up with Victoria's downfall. But inside that quiet living room, lit only by the flicker of the TV and the scratch of a pen on paper, something far more important was happening. Gabriel, the boy who had been dismissed as nothing more than a nuisance, was writing his truth. And Jonathan, the man who had once believed his heart was too shattered to heal, was beginning to realize that sometimes the world tears someone down just so it can raise another up. And in the space between Victoria's venom and Gabriel's ink, a storm was gathering, one that would change all of them forever. The morning air outside the library was sharp, crisp, and full of the promise of winter. Jonathan walked beside Gabriel, their breaths puffing like smoke signals in the cold. The boy clutched his notebook against his chest as though it were armor. He had been quiet all morning, weighed down by the noise surrounding Victoria's scandal. Even with the world buzzing, Jonathan had insisted they keep moving forward. Inside, the library smelled of dust and paper, of hidden worlds stacked in neat rows. It was Gabriel's sanctuary. He moved between the shelves like someone wandering through a cathedral, fingers brushing the spines of books with reverence. Jonathan followed, watching, feeling something inside him soften at the sight. David had loved libraries too, pulling cookbooks from the shelves and reading recipes aloud as though they were fairy tales. Gabriel paused at a section of foreign language books, running his hand across the cracked covers. He pulled out a French reader, the kind most adults found intimidating, and tucked himself into a corner. Jonathan sat across from him, curious. The boy opened the book and began whispering. At first, Jonathan thought he was stumbling over the words, but then he realized Gabriel was not just reading, he was speaking. The rhythm, the inflection, the rolled syllables. It wasn't perfect, but it was fluent enough to draw stares. His lips moved with a grace that didn't belong to a boy who had learned from scraps. Jonathan leaned forward. Gabriel, he said softly, how long have you been studying this? Gabriel looked up, startled, cheeks flushing. I don't know. A while. I find books in the trash sometimes. I watch movies at the library when they let me. Subtitles help. He lowered his gaze, embarrassed. It's probably all wrong. It's not wrong, Jonathan replied, his voice firm. It's extraordinary. Before Gabriel could answer, a woman approached their table. She was elegant, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun and glasses perched on her nose. She held a stack of journals pressed against her chest, but her eyes were fixed on Gabriel. Excuse me, she said in English, her tone polite but direct. I couldn't help overhearing. Do you speak French? Gabriel froze, his body stiff. He glanced at Jonathan, unsure. Jonathan gave a reassuring nod. Go on. Gabriel swallowed hard, then nodded shyly. A little. The woman smiled faintly. Say something for me. His fingers gripped the edges of his notebook until his knuckles whitened. Then, with a breath, he lifted his chin and spoke in French. His words flowed haltingly at first, then faster, stronger, until the sentences spun together with surprising beauty. He spoke of his dreams, of studying stories, of writing books, of someday building a life where children never had to choose between food and hope. The woman's expression softened with every word. When he finished, silence lingered, heavy with awe. Magnifique, she whispered. My name is Dr. Sarah Chun. I teach linguistics at Columbia University. And young man, in all my years of academia, I have never heard such natural fluency from someone self-taught. Gabriel's face went pale. I just practice. She set down her stack of journals on the table as if to anchor herself. Practice has given you a gift. Have you ever taken a proficiency exam? TOEFL, DELF, anything? Gabriel shook his head quickly. No, ma'am, they cost money. I don't... His voice trailed off. Dr. Chun's eyes flickered to Jonathan, then back to Gabriel. We have scholarships for exceptional students. Very few ever qualify. But you, Gabriel, you are different. I could arrange testing, no cost. Would you be interested? For a long moment, Gabriel just stared at her. His lips parted, but no sound came out. He looked at Jonathan, his eyes wide, as if silently asking permission to dream. Jonathan felt his throat tighten. He thought of David in the hospital, whispering that he wanted to grow up to be just like his father. He thought of all the dreams that had died in that sterile room, and of the boy sitting across from him now, a boy carrying the same fire in his chest. Yes, Jonathan said, answering for him, his voice steady. He would be very interested. Gabriel blinked, then nodded quickly, the faintest smile breaking across his face. Yes. Yes, ma'am. I would. Dr. Chun's smile widened. She scribbled something on a card and slid it across the table. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. Bring him to my office. She gathered her journals and left, her heels echoing through the quiet library. Gabriel sat still for a long moment, staring at the card as though it might vanish if he blinked. Finally, he whispered, Mr. Jonathan, no one has ever believed it in me like that before. Jonathan placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. Then get used to it, because this is only the beginning. Outside, the cold wind pressed against the library windows, rattling them like a warning. Jonathan didn't know it yet, but opportunity always carried shadows. Somewhere in the city, Victoria nursed her bitterness, her humiliation curdling into something dangerous. And as Gabriel's future cracked open like a dawn breaking, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The next morning, the city wore its gray coat, clouds pressed low, drizzle streaking against glass. Jonathan held the card Dr. Chun had given them as though it were a ticket to another world. To Gabriel it was. Yet as they stepped into Columbia's campus office, reality struck like a cold slap. Opportunity always came wrapped in red tape. The receptionist smiled politely, her fingers poised over a keyboard. Full name? Gabriel Santos, Jonathan said, his voice calm but firm. Her fingers tapped, the screen blinked, then her smile faltered. Do you have a permanent address, Mr. Santos? Gabriel shifted nervously beside him. Sometimes the shelter on 3rd Street, when there's room. The woman's lips pressed thin. We'll need a residential address for records, and a legal guardian's signature if he's under 18. Jonathan's jaw tightened. I'll sign. I'm afraid only a legal guardian can. Gabriel looked down at his shoes, his toes peeking through the worn fabric, shame blooming on his face. Jonathan saw it, the same resignation he had witnessed yesterday when Victoria had spat her poison, a child who expected the world to slam every door in his face. Jonathan leaned forward, his voice dropping into steel. There must be another way. The woman, clearly uncomfortable, whispered, There are procedures. Exceptions take time. Time. Jonathan knew that word. It was what the doctors had run out of when David lay in a hospital bed, wasting away while insurance companies shuffled papers and approval requests. Time was what bureaucracy used as a weapon. Jonathan straightened, pulling out his phone. He wasn't the man who begged anymore. He was the man who signed checks that made problems disappear. He dialed a number. Within minutes, a lawyer he kept on retainer was on the line, his voice brisk, efficient. Jonathan, I'll get temporary guardianship papers filed. Don't let them turn him away. Jonathan hung up, his chest tight. He looked down at Gabriel. You hear that? You're not going anywhere, not this time. The boy nodded, though doubt still clouded his eyes. He clutched his notebook close as if afraid someone might rip it away. Hours later, after signatures, calls, and stern words exchanged, the forms were stamped. A door that had been closed cracked open just wide enough. That night, Jonathan watched Gabriel hunched over the small desk in his guest room. Paper scattered, pen moving furiously. The boy was already preparing for the test Dr. Chun had promised. Jonathan leaned against the doorway quietly, struck by the sight. David used to look the same, bent over a notebook late at night, scribbling menus for imaginary restaurants he swore they'd open together. "Dad, I'll make the pasta, you do the sauce," he'd say with a grin too wide for his frail frame. Jonathan blinked hard against the memory. "Do you ever sleep?" he asked gently. Gabriel startled, then laughed shyly. "Sometimes, but I don't want to waste time." Jonathan stepped into the room, pulling out the chair across from him. "You're not wasting anything. You're investing in yourself, and I'll make sure no one takes that away from you." Gabriel's eyes shone, gratitude and disbelief tangled together. "Why are you helping me?" Jonathan hesitated, his voice low, steady. "Because once someone I loved was failed by the system. I swore if I ever had the chance I wouldn't let it happen again." Outside, rain lashed against the window, but inside a fragile warmth grew. Gabriel returned to his notebook, scribbling notes in 3 languages, determined, relentless. Jonathan watched, feeling something he hadn't in years, pride without grief attached to it. But the world was already stirring against them. Somewhere across the city, in a dimly lit apartment where curtains were drawn against the night, Victoria scrolled through her shattered reputation online. Every headline carried her name, every comment stripped her mask away. And as bitterness boiled, she whispered to herself, "If Jonathan wants to make a saint out of that boy, I'll show the world who he really is." She began typing, fingers flying across the keyboard, planting the first seeds of a smear campaign. While Gabriel scribbled words of hope, Victoria sharpened her knives of destruction. The next day smelled of old paper and disinfectant. Jonathan pushed open the door to the night school, the kind of place people rarely noticed. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, cracked linoleum floors, and a secretary who looked at him like he didn't belong there. But Gabriel did. The boy stood at his side, shoulders tense, notebook clutched like a lifeline. He had insisted he'd studied here, that his name might be somewhere in their records. Jonathan believed him. He had to. The secretary clicked her tongue when Jonathan gave Gabriel's name. "We keep records, but they're thin. Attendance is spotty for students like him. Lots of missing pieces." She rifled through a drawer and handed over a battered file. Jonathan opened it carefully, like one might open an old wound. Inside were scraps, attendance logs marked with inconsistent check marks, a few graded assignments, most in pencil so faint the writing was nearly gone. But then, tucked behind a stack of forms, Jonathan found a stapled essay, the title written in bold, uneven letters, "The Hospital Waiting Room." His breath caught. He unfolded the pages. Gabriel had been younger when he wrote it, but the voice was unmistakable. Words raw, imperfect, yet sharp enough to pierce through years. It described nights in the oncology wing of a hospital, the humming machines, the tired mothers, the quiet prayers whispered when they thought no one listened. And then, Jonathan's hands trembled as he read. The boy wrote about a child who sat across from him, folding paper cranes out of candy wrappers and scrap paper. "He gave me one and said it was magic. He said it would carry hope, even if my mother didn't get better. I believed him. I still do." Jonathan's vision blurred. He had seen those cranes. He had picked them up off hospital floors, tucked them into shoeboxes after David died, unable to throw away a single one. His son's fingerprints had been on them. And now, here in this essay, they lived again, folded by David's hands, carried in Gabriel's memory. His chest tightened as he read on. Gabriel described the boy's smile, the way he brightened the whole room even when his skin was pale, his body weak. He didn't know the boy's name. He only knew the cranes. Jonathan closed the essay slowly, his hands trembling. He turned to Gabriel, who stood fidgeting, clearly nervous. "You wrote this?" Gabriel nodded, uncertain. "Yes, sir. Years ago. I didn't think it was good. The teacher said I had talent, but—" He trailed off, embarrassed. Jonathan's voice cracked as he whispered, "That boy, with the cranes. Do you remember him?" Gabriel's eyes softened. I do. He was sick, but he smiled a lot. He told me not to give up even when my mom was coughing all night. He said the cranes could carry wishes to the sky. Jonathan shut his eyes, the ache in his chest unbearable. David. His son's spirit was alive in this boy's memory, a thread connecting them both to the same cold, fluorescent-lit waiting room. When he opened his eyes, Gabriel was watching him carefully, sensing the shift. That boy, Jonathan said, his voice heavy with grief and awe, was my son. His name was David. Gabriel's lips parted, his eyes widened. Your son? Jonathan nodded. He's gone now. But those cranes you wrote about, they were his. You knew him, Gabriel. He gave you one. He reached you. The silence between them was so profound it felt like the whole school had stopped breathing. Gabriel's voice wavered as he whispered, I kept that crane until it was stolen. I thought, maybe it was silly, but I always believed it worked, because even when my mom died, I didn't lose everything. I still had the memory of him. Jonathan placed a hand on Gabriel's shoulder, gripping it with a father's steadiness. His throat burned, but his words were clear. It wasn't silly. He wanted you to believe, and now I think he wanted me to find you. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt the cold weight of grief shift inside him. It didn't vanish, but it moved, making space for something else, something alive. But as father and boy stood in that dim school office, bound by a memory neither could ignore, outside forces stirred. Victoria's smear campaign had begun to spread, whispers online, doctored photos, stories questioning Gabriel's honesty. While Jonathan held proof of David's cranes, Victoria was busy folding her own, made not of paper, but of lies. Snow had begun to fall, thick flakes swirling in the glow of city street lamps, as Jonathan clasped the letter in his hands. It was official. Gabriel had been granted a full scholarship. Columbia University. Not a handout, not charity. Earned. The professors who had read his essays had written back in awe. His voice is authentic, urgent, and needed. Jonathan couldn't stop rereading the words. He looked across the dining table at Gabriel, who sat hunched forward, biting his nails, waiting for the verdict. His eyes flicked between Jonathan's face and the sealed envelope as though bracing for rejection. Jonathan cleared his throat. Gabriel. He slid the letter across the table. You did it. They want you. For a heartbeat, Gabriel didn't move. Then his eyes widened, the silence breaking into a choked laugh. He snatched the letter, read it once, twice, then pressed it to his chest. Tears welled and his shoulders shook. I never thought. I thought people like me didn't get chances like this. Jonathan swallowed hard, watching the boy. You didn't just get it. You earned it. The room felt alive with hope, something Jonathan hadn't felt in years. He poured 2 glasses of sparkling cider, raising his in a toast. To David, he said softly, his voice catching, and to Gabriel, for carrying the cranes higher than even David dreamed. Gabriel clinked his glass gently against Jonathan's, smiling through tears. For a moment they were a family, raw, unpolished, but real. But outside their walls, the storm was building. Victoria sat in front of her vanity, scrolling through her phone with a vindictive smirk. Her career had taken a hit since the viral recording of her sneer at Gabriel. Invitations had dried up, sponsors backed out. She blamed one person, Jonathan, and the boy he had chosen over her. You'll regret humiliating me, she muttered, snapping a picture of Gabriel's scholarship announcement that was already making waves online. Headlines sang his praises. From homelessness to Ivy League, a miracle story. Donations poured into the night school program that had fostered him. Victoria's jealousy burned hotter with every glowing comment. People adored Gabriel, the boy she'd once dismissed as street trash. And Jonathan, he was the doting father figure now, celebrated for his generosity. Her nails tapped against the glass screen as she hatched her plan. She knew the internet loved a downfall as much as a success story. All she needed was doubt, and she was ready to plant it. The attack came 2 days later. Gabriel was walking home from the library when Jonathan's phone buzzed violently. He glanced at the screen, Messages from friends, colleagues, even strangers. Is this true? Have you seen the video? Careful, Jonathan. This could ruin you both. With dread thick in his chest, Jonathan opened the link. There, circulating across social media, was a grainy video. It showed Gabriel in a convenience store slipping something into his pocket, a candy bar. The caption read, "Colombia's new hero," or just another lying thief. The December morning cut like glass. Jonathan pulled his coat tighter, but the cold wasn't what froze him in place. It was her words. Victoria's voice, so casual, so unguarded, had ripped open a wound he thought had scarred over years ago. "He looks like your dead son," she said, her tone as flat as if she were pointing out a change in the weather. The words dropped between them, heavy and merciless, echoing through the nearly empty parking lot of the shopping center. Jonathan's breath caught. For a moment, everything around him blurred, the crunch of distant footsteps, the screech of a car pulling out, even the sting of the cold wind. All he could see was the boy sitting on the curb, his knees pulled to his chest, a piece of cardboard resting against his small legs. He couldn't have been more than 10. The same age David would be. Jonathan's chest tightened. The boy's face, his hair, even the curious tilt of his head. It was all there, haunting him like a ghost conjured from the past. His son's face was gone, buried with him 5 years ago. And yet, here it was staring back at him through a stranger. "Jonathan?" Victoria tugged on his arm, her designer handbag slipping from her shoulder. She was smiling, laughing even, as if this were some ridiculous coincidence to be brushed away. "You look like you've seen a ghost." But Jonathan wasn't smiling. He couldn't. His eyes were locked on the boy, whose sneakers were torn open at the toes, whose oversized clothes looked donated by someone who never thought twice about who might wear them. Yet even sitting there, cold and alone, the boy met Jonathan's gaze with a strange steadiness. A voice broke the silence. "Sir, do you have any change?" Jonathan flinched. The boy's tone was soft, almost apologetic, and the sound of it dragged him back to hospital nights when David, pale and weak from chemotherapy, still asked if he was okay. The resemblance was unbearable. His words cracked into silence. For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Jonathan felt his chest swell with something fierce, something proud. This was no frightened boy anymore. This was a man standing in his truth, refusing to bow to shame. Then came the first clap, hesitant, from a professor in the front row. Another followed, then another. Within seconds, the auditorium erupted in applause, a thunderous wave that drowned the cruel whispers. Cameras flashed, capturing not a thief, but a survivor. But in the corner, near the back of the room, Jonathan saw her. Victoria. Her painted lips curled in a smile that wasn't joy, but poison. She clapped slowly, mockingly, her eyes locked on Jonathan's. The message in her gaze was clear. This isn't over. Jonathan's fists tightened at his sides. He knew she wouldn't stop until she had destroyed them both. But as he looked at Gabriel, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking from the release of truth and fear, Jonathan swore to himself he would not let her win. Not this time. The winter storm outside rattled against the glass walls of Jonathan's penthouse, but inside the silence was heavier than the snow. Gabriel sat curled on the couch, a blanket draped around him, exhaustion etched into his young face after the whirlwind of the scholarship ceremony. Jonathan lingered by the window, his jaw tight, replaying Victoria's venomous smile in his mind. He knew her too well. She wasn't finished. The phone rang. Jonathan answered without thinking. "Jonathan?" A familiar voice cooed, dripping with artificial sweetness. "It's been too long." "Victoria." Jonathan's grip on the phone stiffened. "What do you want?" "I saw your little prodigy on stage," she purred. "Brave speech, almost made me tear up. But you and I both know the world isn't as forgiving as one round of applause." Jonathan's chest tightened. He glanced at Gabriel, who had drifted into a light sleep, his hand still clutching a textbook. "If you're calling to gloat, oh darling, I'm calling to warn." Her tone dropped, sharp as glass. "You've tied your legacy, your fortune, your reputation to that boy. But you've forgotten something, haven't you? The past always has receipts. Jonathan's pulse thudded in his ears. What are you talking about? Her laugh slithered through the line. David, your perfect son. Everyone believes he was an angel. But what happens when people hear what he was really like? I have proof. Diaries. Messages. Things you'd rather stay buried. Jonathan felt the air leave his lungs. He stumbled back a step, gripping the counter for support. David, the memory of his son, had been the one untouchable place in his heart. To tarnish him was to desecrate his grave. You wouldn't dare, Jonathan rasped. Oh, I would, Victoria whispered. Unless, of course, you distance yourself from Gabriel, publicly, break him, push him back onto the streets, then maybe, just maybe, I'll keep David's secrets to myself. The line went dead before Jonathan could respond. He lowered the phone slowly, his hands trembling. Rage, grief, and fear swirled together, nearly choking him. David's memory wasn't just sacred, it was the compass by which Jonathan lived. If Victoria truly had something that could twist his son's legacy, the fallout would be unbearable. The next morning, Jonathan tried to hide his storm of emotions, but Gabriel noticed the shift. You didn't sleep, Gabriel said softly, setting a steaming mug of coffee in front of him. Jonathan forced a smile, though his eyes betrayed him. Just work things on my mind. Gabriel tilted his head, the same way David used to when he was suspicious. She's not done, is she? Jonathan froze, then sighed. No, she's not. Gabriel's lips pressed into a thin line. Then let her come. I've survived worse than her games. Jonathan looked at him, this boy who had once been broken by hunger and cold, and realized Gabriel wasn't just surviving anymore. He was standing, fighting, refusing to be erased. Still, the threat of David's name hung heavy between them. Jonathan reached across the table, gripping Gabriel's hand. Whatever she does, whatever she says, we don't let her define us. We fight back. Together. Gabriel nodded, his eyes fierce with a determination Jonathan hadn't seen before. But deep down, Jonathan couldn't shake the dread. If Victoria truly held David's secrets, what darkness was she about to unleash? And when it came, would it shatter them both? The news didn't break quietly. Jonathan woke to a flurry of messages, missed calls, alerts, headlines flashing across his phone. He opened one, then another, and felt his chest cave in. Millionaire's dead son had a dark secret. Diaries reveal violence, drugs, and a shattered legacy. The article bled across every screen. Photos of David, his bright smile, his youthful face, were spliced alongside grainy snapshots of handwritten pages Jonathan recognized, his son's journals. Jonathan staggered to the couch, his knees weak. His hands trembled as he read the words David had once scribbled in private, words never meant for the world, confessions of sneaking out, of fights, of experimenting with drugs he'd sworn he'd never touch. The entries weren't all damning. David's anguish, his regrets, his desperation for approval glowed between the lines, but out of context, they painted a picture of a troubled, angry boy. Victoria hadn't lied. She had the receipts. Jonathan pressed a hand to his temple, the memory of David's laughter clashing violently with the headlines screaming, violent tendencies. His heart screamed in protest. David wasn't a monster. He was a child lost in grief after his mother's death. But the world didn't want nuance. The world wanted scandal. Jonathan? The voice pulled him back. Gabriel stood in the doorway, his face pale, eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes when someone else's storm becomes your own. Jonathan's phone buzzed again. Calls from board members, from colleagues, from people who once praised him, now circling like vultures. He silenced them and looked at Gabriel. They dug into David, Jonathan whispered, his voice raw. They're twisting him into something he wasn't, and they won't stop until it destroys me. Gabriel stepped closer, his voice hushed. It's not just you they're trying to destroy. It's me, too. Jonathan's cheeks tightened. Gabriel was right. Victoria had found a way to bind both past and present into one weapon to smear David's memory while tearing apart Gabriel's future. Later that day, Jonathan sat in a boardroom filled with the sharp scent of cologne and judgment. The board of his company, the empire he had built, looked at him with suspicion. Jonathan, one man said, steepling his fingers, the foundation relies on reputation. If the public begins to question your judgment, adopting this homeless boy, attaching him to your name, it reflects poorly on us all, especially now, with revelations about your son. Jonathan's jaw clenched. My son was not a villain. He was human. He was hurting. And Gabriel, he gestured at the boy sitting beside him, his chin lifted with quiet defiance, is not some burden. He is proof that people can rise out of the darkest places. If you can't see that, then maybe I don't belong here. Gasps circled the room. Gabriel looked at him in shock, then pride. Jonathan's voice had cracked, but it carried the weight of truth. That night, as they returned to the penthouse, Gabriel finally spoke. She's winning, isn't she? Jonathan stared out at the glittering city lights, his reflection hollow against the glass. Not yet. She stripped David down to shadows, but I know my son. I know who he truly was, and I'll remind the world, even if it costs me everything. Gabriel stepped beside him, his presence steady. Then we fight. Not for me, not just for you, for him. Jonathan turned, meeting the boy's eyes, and for a fleeting second he saw David, not the broken image splashed across tabloids, but the boy he had loved with every ounce of his heart. Victoria wanted war, and now Jonathan was ready to give it to her. The press conference was Jonathan's idea, but Gabriel knew the risk the moment they walked into the flood of flashing cameras. Reporters shouted, microphones thrust forward, the air thick with hunger for scandal. Jonathan straightened his suit, but his eyes betrayed the storm inside. Gabriel, in his thrifted jacket and borrowed tie, felt the weight of every stare, every whispered word. The homeless boy, the replacement son. Jonathan stepped to the podium, gripping its edges as if anchoring himself against the tide. The cameras quieted in anticipation. My name is Jonathan Hale, he began, his voice steady but raw. You know me as a businessman, as a philanthropist. But today, I stand here as a father. Gasps rippled through the room. Everyone knew what he was about to address. My son, David Hale, was taken from this world too soon, and now his name, his memory, is being desecrated by half-truths and stolen pages. Yes, David made mistakes. He was young. He struggled with grief, but he was also brilliant, compassionate, and brave. He was my heart, and no smear campaign will change that. Jonathan paused, letting the silence stretch. The cameras clicked furiously. I will not be blackmailed. I will not abandon Gabriel. He glanced at the boy standing just behind him, his expression fierce. Because he reminds me of the goodness my son fought to hold on to, even in his darkest days. Gabriel is not David's replacement. He is himself, and I choose to stand with him. The room erupted. Questions shouted, accusations heard. The article was vicious. Photos of Gabriel sleeping in subway stations, police reports from nights he'd been picked up for loitering, even rumors spun from people who claimed to know him from the streets. The words criminal, delinquent, con artist screamed in bold. Gabriel's face drained as he read. His throat tightened. They're making me out like some thug, like I don't deserve any of this. Jonathan tore the paper from his hands and tossed it aside. It's lies, Gabriel. They'll twist anything to make you small. Gabriel stared at the floor, his voice breaking. But what if they're right? What if I don't belong here? Jonathan grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to meet his eyes. Listen to me. You are not your past. You are not what she or anyone else says. You belong where you decide you belong, and I'll fight until my last breath to make sure you believe that. Tears stung Gabriel's eyes, but for the first time he let them fall. Jonathan pulled him close, his embrace fierce, protective, fatherly. But in the shadows of the city, Victoria watched the press coverage on her tablet, her smile sharp as a blade. She had forced Jonathan to the edge, stripped Gabriel bare before the world. And yet, they hadn't broken. She closed the tablet, poured herself a glass of wine, and whispered, "If you want a war, Jonathan, I'll give you one." And in that moment, the real battle began. Victoria's war didn't arrive with smoke or gunfire. It came with whispers, soft, poisonous, carefully placed in the right ears. By the time Jonathan and Gabriel sat down to breakfast one quiet morning, the damage was already done. The housekeeper, usually cheerful, couldn't meet their eyes. The doorman downstairs offered only a stiff nod. Even the neighbors in the glossy building had begun to look at Jonathan with suspicion, as if scandal had stained the marble floors. Then the phone rang. Jonathan answered, his voice clipped. "Hale." A pause, then his face hardened. "That's impossible." He listened, every second draining the color from his face. Finally, he whispered, "I'll handle it." He hung up, hands trembling. Gabriel leaned forward. "What is it?" Jonathan pressed his palms to his temples. "They say you stole, from the foundation." Gabriel froze. "What? No, I would never." "They have bank records, Gabriel. Transfers, thousands, moved into an account under your name." Gabriel shot up from the chair, panic flashing in his eyes. "That's not me! I don't even have a bank account!" Jonathan's jaw tightened. He knew the boy was telling the truth, but the evidence would look ironclad to anyone else. "It's Victoria," he muttered. "She's planted it. She wants to make you look like a leech, a fraud." The betrayal was a knife that cut deeper than any headline, because this wasn't just about destroying Jonathan's image anymore, it was about destroying Gabriel's very chance at redemption. By afternoon, the accusations were everywhere. Social media lit up with hashtags. #ScamSon, #FakeFamily, Hale fraud. Memes of Gabriel's face plastered over mugshots circulated like wildfire. Gabriel sat in Jonathan's study, staring at the floor as his world collapsed around him. "They're never going to believe me," he whispered. "They'll always see me as trash." Jonathan crossed the room, kneeling beside him. His voice cracked but carried iron beneath it. "Listen to me. This is what she wants. She wants you broken, Gabriel. She wants you to give up. But I won't let that happen." Gabriel's throat tightened. "But what if I can't fight her? What if I'm not strong enough?" Jonathan placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then you lean on me. I've fought bigger wars than this. I lost my son. I won't lose you too." For the first time, Gabriel looked at Jonathan not just as a benefactor, but as something closer to a father. His chest ached with a mix of fear and gratitude. That night, Jonathan poured himself a drink and sat alone in the dim glow of the city lights. His empire was crumbling, his name smeared, his son's memory shredded, and now Gabriel was in the crosshairs. But as he stared into the glass, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, not despair, but fire. If Victoria wanted a war, he would give her one she couldn't survive. He set the glass down, steady hands now, and whispered into the dark. "You've taken everything from me, Victoria, but you won't take him." The storm broke late at night. Rain lashed against the glass walls of Jonathan's study. The city skyline smeared into a blur of silver streaks. Gabriel sat curled in an armchair, his face half lit by the glow of Jonathan's laptop. His shoulders slumped, but his eyes carried a quiet fury. Jonathan tapped the keyboard, scrolling through financial statements, wire transfers, digital footprints, anything that could trace the false account in Gabriel's name. His voice was low, but sharp. She was sloppy. Somewhere in here, she slipped. For hours, the only sounds were the rain and the dull hum of the machine. Then Gabriel leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "Wait, go back. That name." Jonathan froze. On the line was a detail too small for most to notice, but Gabriel's life on the streets had taught him to see what others missed. The transfer came from an offshore account registered under Victoria L. Harland Holdings, a shell company. Jonathan's pulse quickened. She left her fingerprints. Gabriel sat up straighter, his voice trembling with both excitement and fear. "If we can prove that money came from her, then we can prove she framed you." For the first time in weeks, Jonathan felt a spark of hope. But as quickly as it came, it curdled into dread. He closed the laptop with a snap. "This isn't just about clearing your name. If she realizes we have this..." He trailed off, the thought unfinished. Gabriel swallowed hard. "She'll come after us." The following morning, Jonathan made calls to his lawyer, to his most trusted investigator. Each conversation was guarded, careful, but he knew Victoria's reach. If she had the power to plant evidence, she had the power to hear whispers. That afternoon, Gabriel found himself pacing the halls of the penthouse, the walls closing in around him. He stopped in front of a photo of David, Jonathan's late son, laughing on a summer afternoon, hair ruffled, eyes alight. Gabriel touched the glass, whispering, "You look like me. Or maybe I look like you. But I'm not you. I can't be you." The photo offered no answer, only the silence of the dead. By nightfall, Jonathan and Gabriel had pieced together a fragile case. The trail led not only to Victoria's holding company, but also to a man named Marcus Dean, a fixer known in elite circles for laundering money and burying secrets. Jonathan's investigator called with a warning. "If you push this, you'll be stepping into a world where people disappear for less. Victoria doesn't just want your reputation, she wants control. Expose her, and she'll treat you like a threat that needs to be eliminated." Jonathan's grip tightened around the phone. "Let her try." Gabriel sat across from him, watching his face. "Are we really doing this?" Jonathan met his eyes, steel in his voice. "We don't have a choice. This is no longer about survival. This is war." A flash of lightning split the sky outside, as if the city itself bore witness to the declaration. And in that instant, Gabriel felt the shift. He was no longer just the boy Jonathan had taken in. He was a soldier in a battle that could cost them both everything. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear, a fragile flame of hope flickered. For the first time, he wasn't just fighting to survive, he was fighting to belong. The night of reckoning arrived without ceremony. No invitations, no stage lights, only the hush of a storm-tossed sky and the chill weight of inevitability pressing against the walls of Jonathan Hale's penthouse. Victoria entered like a shadow, cloaked in perfume and steel. Her heels clicked across marble, her lips painted in a smile sharp enough to cut. Gabriel stood near the window, rain behind him, city lights flickering across his face. Jonathan sat rigid in his leather chair as though bracing for a verdict. Victoria's voice dripped with mockery. "So this is the prodigal? The stray you've dressed in David's ghost? Tell me, Jonathan, when did your philanthropy turn into self-delusion?" Jonathan's eyes burned. "Stop." His voice cracked but held firm. "I know what you did. The false account, the shell company. We traced it back to you." Victoria didn't flinch. Instead, she laughed low and dangerous. "And what do you think that proves? Men like you live and die by reputation. The world doesn't need facts. It needs a narrative, and I've already written yours." She turned to Gabriel, her gaze cutting like frost. "Do you know what you are, boy? An echo. A hollow reminder of a son long dead. You think you're his replacement? You're nothing but a shadow Jonathan clings to so he won't have to face the rot in his own heart." Gabriel trembled, but something inside him surged, a defiance that had been growing ever since the parking lot. He stepped forward, his voice raw but steady. "I'm not his son, and I'm not your victim either." Victoria's smile faltered just for a second. Jonathan stood now, the storm outside rattling glass. "Enough games, Victoria. Tell him. Tell him the truth before I drag it into the light myself." Her composure cracked, her jaw tightened, her hand curling around her purse like a weapon. "You wouldn't dare." Jonathan's voice thundered, louder too. "Hand the storm." "Tell him!" The silence that followed was unbearable, stretched taut as wire. Finally, Victoria's mask slipped, and her words fell like a dagger. "He is David's blood." The room spun. Gabriel staggered back, breath caught in his throat. Jonathan's chest heaved, every nerve in his body rebelling against the words. Victoria stepped closer to Gabriel, her eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. "Years before your perfect little family, Jonathan, he was mine. My mistake, my shame. I left him, and fate buried him in filth and hunger. But then, look how beautifully life twisted. You mourned your golden boy, and in your grief, you clung to mine. The resemblance, it's no accident. He carries your son's bloodline, because he carries yours." Jonathan froze. His heart collapsed in his chest. "Mine?" The air shattered. Gabriel's knees weakened. "You mean, you're my father?" His voice was barely more than a whisper, but it cut deeper than any accusation. Victoria's lips curved into triumph. "Yes, Your father. And the irony. You saved the very child you abandoned, Jonathan. Only now, he'll destroy you. The storm roared outside as though the heavens themselves recoiled. Jonathan reached toward Gabriel, tears streaking down his face. No. Gabriel, I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know. Gabriel backed away, his chest heaving, torn between rage and the aching need for truth. His whole life had been shaped by absence, by hunger, by the ache of never belonging. And now this man, this grieving millionaire, was not just a savior, but the father he never knew existed. Victoria's laughter rang out, sharp and merciless. Tell me, Jonathan, how does it feel? To realize that your redemption and your ruin wear the same face? Jonathan's voice broke as he whispered, "It feels like my last chance to make things right." And Gabriel, caught between stormlight and shadows, you had no choice but to decide whether he could believe him. Victoria immediately recoiled, taking a step back as though the child's words were toxic. "Jonathan, let's go, please. We shouldn't encourage these people. You give them $1 today, and they'll swarm here tomorrow. You know how it is." Jonathan's throat closed around the words he wanted to say. He was a man who had built an empire of restaurants across the city, a man who could sign a check and change a person's life in minutes. Yet in that moment, he felt powerless. The boy wasn't just a stranger. He was a mirror to everything Jonathan had lost, everything he had failed to protect. "What's your name?" Jonathan finally asked, his voice low but steady. The boy hesitated, shifting on the concrete as if weighing whether to trust him. "Gabriel, sir. Gabriel Santos." Jonathan repeated the name under his breath, testing it as though it might unravel some mystery. Gabriel. A name heavy with meaning, almost biblical, and it struck him that destiny sometimes whispered in small, ordinary moments. Beside him, Victoria's patience wore thin. She tugged at his sleeve harder now, her lips pressed into a line of annoyance. "Jonathan, don't do this. We're late. Do you want people to see you standing here talking to a dirty child on the ground? This is embarrassing." But Jonathan barely heard her. All he could see was the boy's quiet dignity, the way he sat upright, the way he didn't complain, the way his eyes held both exhaustion and a flicker of hope. It was the same light he had once seen in David, even in the hospital when the world had been cruel and unrelenting. Something inside him shifted. He couldn't explain it, but he knew this wasn't a coincidence. The resemblance wasn't just in the hair or the shape of the face, it was in the way the boy carried himself and the kindness hidden behind tired eyes. Victoria exhaled loudly, her breath puffing into the cold air. "John, Ethan, I swear, if you stand here another second, I'm leaving. We have a reservation. Let's go." But Jonathan didn't move. His feet felt rooted to the ground, his gaze tied to the boy like an anchor. Because beneath the shock and the grief, something else was taking hold. Something deeper. This wasn't just a random encounter on a cold December morning. This was the beginning of something Jonathan didn't yet understand, but already he knew he couldn't walk away. The photographs were worn at the edges, their colors softened by time. Jonathan kept them pressed flat in his wallet, though he rarely looked at them anymore. It hurt too much. But that morning, as he stood there in the brittle air, watching Gabriel's small hands clutching his cardboard sign, the urge was overwhelming. He slipped the wallet out of his coat pocket and thumbed it open, just enough to see the boy who once made his world whole. David. In the first photo, his son's hair curled in wild, unruly waves. He had flour dusting his cheeks, standing in Jonathan's restaurant kitchen with a wooden spoon like a scepter. His smile was crooked, mischievous, alive. That boy had dreams too big for his small frame. He wanted to be a chef like his father, to cook meals that made people feel warm, safe, at home. Jonathan had believed, foolishly perhaps, that there would be time to watch those dreams unfold. But time had betrayed him. The hospital years had changed the boy in ways Jonathan could barely bear to recall, yet even weakened, even when the medicine left him pale and trembling, David still found a way to smile at the nurses, to share his toys with the other children, to reassure his father that everything would be all right. His compassion had been a force bigger than the disease that consumed him. Jonathan could still hear him saying, "Don't worry, Dad. You have to keep cooking for people. Promise me." Now standing in front of Gabriel, it was as if David had stepped out of those photographs. The same head tilt, the same quiet determination in his eyes. Jonathan's chest felt like it was splitting open. "Jonathan." Victoria's voice jolted him back. She had folded her arms tightly across her chest, shifting impatiently on her heels. "Are you really going to stand here all day? We're late. This is ridiculous." Her tone was sharp, the kind she used when her careful, curated image was threatened. Jonathan closed his wallet slowly and slid it back into his pocket. His heart thudded. He wasn't sure if the boy had noticed the trembling in his hands. He didn't want to scare him away. Gabriel glanced down at his sneakers, the fabric frayed, his toes peeking through like small, vulnerable secrets. He spoke softly, almost as if he knew what Jonathan was seeing. "I don't usually ask for money, only when I can't make enough." Jonathan studied him. "Enough for what?" "Food. Sometimes books." Gabriel's eyes flickered with a shy kind of pride, as though the second word might sound silly to strangers. Books. Jonathan's throat tightened. David had filled notebooks with sketches and little stories, even when he was too weak to stand. He would leave them scattered across the house, each page a tiny plea not to be forgotten. Victoria scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Jonathan, he's manipulating you. They all do this. Dead mother, sick father, something tragic. It's a performance. Look at him. He probably hasn't been to school in his life." Her words sliced the air, cruel and careless, but Gabriel didn't flinch. He only lowered his head slightly, a gesture of resignation that spoke louder than any defense. He had heard it before, many times. Jonathan's heart ached. That resilience, that quiet endurance, it was David all over again. He wanted to ask more, to peel back the layers of this boy's story, but his throat tightened as memories pressed against him. The hospital's fluorescent lights, the beeping machines, the smell of antiseptic. The way David's fingers had grown thin, but his grip remained firm when he held his father's hand. A sudden gust of wind rattled the cardboard sign in Gabriel's lap, and Jonathan caught the words scrawled across it. "Hungry, but hopeful." Hopeful. The word seemed impossible, yet Gabriel carried it like a badge. Jonathan felt his chest stir with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Not just grief, not just longing, but the faint, flickering edge of possibility. He turned to Victoria, whose face was tight with irritation. She looked like she wanted to drag him away by force, to make him forget this moment. But Jonathan couldn't. He wouldn't. Because staring at Gabriel, he had the unmistakable feeling that this was not a coincidence. It was something larger, something that reached across years of pain and loss to place this boy directly in his path. Jonathan's heart whispered a truth he could no longer deny. This meeting was not the end of his grief. It was the beginning of something else. The restaurant smelled of warmth and garlic, the kind of scent that usually comforted Jonathan like an embrace. Today, it only seemed to magnify the weight in his chest. He held the heavy glass door open, motioning for Gabriel to step inside. The boy hesitated, peering past the polished wood and candlelit tables as though the place were another planet. "It's all right," Jonathan murmured. "Go on." Gabriel shuffled forward, his sneakers squeaking faintly against the polished tile. His eyes darted around, wide with awe and uncertainty. The crystal glasses on each table, the waiters in crisp uniforms, the hush of quiet conversation. It was a world he clearly didn't feel he belonged in. Jonathan remembered the first time David had walked into one of his restaurants, tiny hands slipping into his father's as he whispered, "One day, Dad, I'll have my name on the menu too." Victoria trailed behind, her heels clicking like the ticking of a bomb. "Jonathan, really?" she hissed under her breath. "This is humiliating. People will stare. You can't just drag a filthy kid into an upscale restaurant." But Jonathan ignored her. He motioned for a waiter, an old employee who immediately lit up with recognition. "Mr. Richardson, a table for two?" His glance flickered briefly to Gabriel, confusion clouding his face, but Jonathan's nod silenced any questions. 3, Jonathan corrected, though his tone was flat. Victoria's face reddened. She folded her arms across her chest, exhaling like smoke from a fire. They were led to a small table near the window. The waiter placed menus before them. Jonathan noticed how Gabriel touched the edges gently, like the pages might tear under his fingers. His lips moved silently as he scanned the words, stumbling over pronunciations, lingering on each price tag like a man staring down a mountain. "Choose whatever you'd like," Jonathan said softly. "Do, and worry about the cost." Gabriel's eyes flicked up, startled. "Sir, I don't want to waste your money. I can eat something small." Jonathan's chest tightened. "Gabriel, order what you want, not what's cheapest. I know how it feels to count every dollar. Trust me." Victoria let out a loud, sharp laugh, one that drew glances from nearby tables. "Oh, this is rich. You're seriously entertaining this performance? He's playing you like a fiddle. Look at him, pretending to be shy, pretending to care about your wallet. Jonathan, you're being pathetic." Jonathan really turned to look at her. Her eyes were cold, glittering with irritation rather than empathy. "Enough, Victoria," he said quietly, but there was steel in his tone. Gabriel lowered his head, cheeks flushing. He shifted in his seat as though he might bolt for the door. Jonathan reached across the table, not touching, just steadying him with his gaze. "You don't have to prove anything," he said gently. "You're here as my guest." The boy nodded, small and unsure, then returned to the menu. Finally, with careful precision, he whispered, "Spaghetti. Just spaghetti, please." Jonathan smiled, though his heart cracked. David had once said the same thing on his birthday when the waiters offered anything he wanted. Spaghetti, with sauce, extra garlic. Jonathan had laughed then, thinking his son's simplicity was the kind of wisdom adults forget. The food arrived, steaming plates placed before them. Gabriel's eyes widened, but he waited until Jonathan picked up his fork before touching his own. He ate slowly, almost reverently, savoring every bite as if it were the most extraordinary meal in the world. Victoria, however, didn't eat. She stared at Jonathan with tight lips, fury rising like boiling water. Finally, she leaned forward, her voice a razor blade. "Jonathan, this is your last warning. Either you come with me right now, or this—" She gestured sharply at Gabriel. "This circus ends our relationship. I will not be dragged into some pity project that makes us look like fools." Jonathan set down his fork. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the clink of glasses at other tables. He studied her face, the one he had shared his bed with for 2 years, and saw nothing he recognized anymore. His eyes shifted back to Gabriel, who sat frozen, his fork midair, his entire body tense with guilt. Jonathan leaned slightly toward him, his voice calm, steady, certain. "You haven't done anything wrong, Gabriel. Don't ever think that." Victoria slammed her napkin onto the table. "That's it. We're done. Enjoy your charity case, Jonathan. When this little thief robs you blind, don't say I didn't warn you." She grabbed her purse and stormed out, her heels echoing like gunshots across the floor. Jonathan exhaled slowly, a strange calm settling over him. For the first time in years, he felt clarity. The weight of her presence was gone, and in its place he felt something almost forgotten. Freedom. Gabriel's eyes shimmered with uncertainty. "Mr. Jonathan, I don't want to cause trouble. Maybe I should leave." Jonathan shook his head. "No, you're staying. Eat your spaghetti." His lips curved into the faintest smile. "We have things to talk about." The boy nodded slowly, picking up his fork again. Outside, the cold December wind howled against the windows, but inside, Jonathan felt warmth stir where there had been only ice. Something had shifted, something irreversible. This was not about lunch. This was about who he would choose to be from this moment forward. The waiter cleared away the plates, and for the first time in years, Jonathan realized he wasn't rushing. He wasn't glancing at his watch, wasn't checking messages or planning the next meeting. He was watching a boy eat spaghetti as if it were the most sacred meal of his life. Every careful bite, every moment, Gabriel paused to chew as though memorizing the taste. It wasn't just hunger being satisfied. It was dignity being restored. When the last forkful disappeared, Gabriel sat back, embarrassed by the clean plate before him. He wiped his mouth with the napkin as he had seen Jonathan do, mimicking every gesture with a quiet precision that tugged at Jonathan's chest. David used to do the same thing. When he was younger, he'd mirror his father in everything, as if practicing how to become the man he admired. Jonathan leaned forward. "You keep a notebook, don't you?" he asked softly. Gabriel froze, his hands clenched slightly in his lap. "Yes, sir," he said after a pause, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you write in it?" The boy hesitated, as if weighing whether to admit too much. "Stories. Things I see, things I imagine. I know it's silly." Jonathan's voice came low and firm. "It's not silly." Gabriel's eyes lifted, uncertain. He fished the notebook from his worn backpack, laying it gently on the table as though it were made of glass. The cover was bent and frayed, held together by sheer persistence. Jonathan picked it up carefully and opened to the first page. The handwriting was shaky but deliberate, words pressed into the paper with such force that some letters cut grooves. The sentences were full of small stumbles, but the images were alive. A boy in a waiting room who turned his IV stand into a knight's lance. A girl in the shelter who braided her little brother's hair so he wouldn't feel ashamed at school. A man who gave away his last sandwich and D said he wasn't hungry. Jonathan's throat tightened. These weren't silly scribbles. These were stories born of survival, observations painted with a depth most adults couldn't reach. The voice on the page was honest, unpolished, but burning with truth. He turned another page. This one nearly made him stop breathing. It was a story about a boy in a hospital bed, too weak to play, who still smiled at the nurses and shared his toys with the others. At the edge of the page, Gabriel had drawn a paper crane, its wings stretched wide as though ready to fly. Jonathan shut his eyes, pain rolling through him like thunder. David. His son had filled their house with paper cranes. Hundreds of them, folded during the long months of chemo, each one a tiny prayer for more time. Jonathan had kept them in boxes, unable to throw them away, unable to look at them too long either. And here, in Gabriel's fragile notebook, was the same image. "Where did you see this?" Jonathan asked, his voice rough. Gabriel shrugged, suddenly nervous. "At the hospital, years ago. My mom was sick. I used to wait for her. There was a boy once. He folded paper cranes all the time. He gave me one. Said it would bring hope." Jonathan's hands trembled on the notebook. His eyes blurred with tears he didn't want Gabriel to see. David, his boy, the one who had left him 5 years ago, had been there, folding cranes, passing hope to another child who had carried it with him all this time. "I kept that crane for a while," Gabriel said softly, eyes fixed on the table. "But when my backpack got stolen, it was gone. I still remember it, though." Jonathan's voice faltered, a mix of grief and awe. "That boy was my son." Jonathan's blood ran cold. He knew the video was old, manipulated, a weapon, but the comments already told the story. Figures. Once a thief, always a thief. Can't polish trash. Gabriel came home that evening buzzing with energy, unaware of the storm. He held up a stack of borrowed books, grinning. "Look, Mr. Richardson, they let me take extra since I'm starting early classes." Jonathan forced a smile, but his stomach churned. He knew Gabriel's joy would be short-lived. He set down his phone carefully, as though it might explode, and said softly, "Gabriel, we need to talk." The boy's smile faltered. His eyes flickered to the phone, then back to Jonathan. He saw the weight in his guardian's expression and froze. "What happened?" Gabriel whispered, his voice already trembling. Jonathan exhaled, the truth cutting like glass. "Someone is trying to destroy you." The warmth in the room vanished, replaced by a suffocating fear. Gabriel sank into the nearest chair, his hands clutching his books like a shield. And Jonathan knew this was only the beginning. Victoria's war had begun. Jonathan hadn't seen the City Hall auditorium this packed in years. Reporters crowded the aisles, their cameras hungry, lenses pointed like rifles at the stage where Gabriel sat stiffly in a borrowed suit. The scholarship ceremony had been meant to celebrate him, his triumph, his future, but instead it had been hijacked by whispers, the viral video still trending with venom. Jonathan's stomach twisted as he adjusted his tie, watching Gabriel fidget in his chair. The boy's wide eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on the flashing lights, then on Jonathan, searching for reassurance. Jonathan nodded once, slow and steady, though his insides screamed. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat, but before he could begin, a reporter shouted over the crowd, "What about the theft, Gabriel? Diki, you deny stealing from that convenience store?" Gasps rippled through the audience, the camera's microphones shoved forward. The boy flinched as though struck. Jonathan stood immediately, rage simmering, but Gabriel raised a hand, a trembling hand, and stopped him. "No," Gabriel said, his voice cracking, but clear enough to silence the room. "Let me speak." He rose to his feet, every inch of his lean frame shaking under the scrutiny. He swallowed hard and spoke directly to the cameras as though confessing to the world. "Yes, that video is real. I was hungry, I was cold, and yes, I stole a candy bar. I was 12. His voice faltered, but he pushed on. "That was the lowest moment of my life. I hated myself for it. But I also promised myself I would never steal again. I went back the next day, and when I had enough coins, I paid for it." The clerk laughed at me. He didn't even remember, but I remembered. The room was dead silent, reporters frozen, lenses catching the sheen of tears in his eyes. "I don't want to be judged by the worst thing I ever did as a child," Gabriel continued, his voice trembling but growing stronger. "I want to be judged by what I've done since. By the nights I spent under bridges with nothing but books to keep me alive, by the essays I wrote in the dark, by the languages I taught myself because I believed knowledge was freedom. I am not perfect. I am not spotless. But I am not trash. I am not worthless.